At that point, digital music went underground for a number of years, and the market has never quite recovered. Now, I went through this little history because I believe it's important to just put the issues of digital monetizing, technological change in perspective. Now, if we're looking at this bill and how it works, these are some of the fundamental problems. We believe that this government has certainly declared war on one of the principles of Canadian copyright, which is collective licensing. And you don't have to look any further than their attack on the levy. The levy was a made-in-Canada solution that allowed for format shifting while providing a badly needed stream of revenue to the artists. The levy worked on cassettes, it worked on writable CDs. However, when we tried to update it to the MP3, we saw the Conservatives misrepresenting the levy, misrepresenting the costs. They've used it as a straw man in numerous of their political mailings. Now let's see what the national media had to say about this Tory attack on remuneration of artists. The Edmonton Journal said that the New Democratic Party that was supporting the levy offered a, quote, perfectly reasonable compromise, and that the industry minister, quote, misrepresented the contents of what the levy represented on what was actually a, quote, thoughtful bill that upholds the basic Canadian values of straight dealing. I thought the National Post was even blunter. It says this government's nonsensical boo hiss no tax response is just plain dumb. So Bill C-32, as long as there's no digital locks, will allow for all manner of copying and backing up on the guise that it's technologically neutral, but it's very clearly not technologically neutral because it is going after one of the few revenue streams that exist for artists. Now the government's saying that they have all these fair dealing exemptions for education. But let's look at some of the really glaring irregularities of this bill. Under C-32, students who are taking long-distance courses will be forced to destroy their class notes after 30 days. Teachers will be forced to destroy their online classes. This is the digital equivalent of telling universities they have to burn their textbooks at the end of every session. I mean, what kind of government would force students to burn their class notes as somehow protecting of copyright? No writer benefits from this, and no student benefits. This provision shows how badly out of whack this government is when it comes to understanding the potential for digital education. Now we see these same punitive measures brought to bear against librarians. They'll be forced to destroy interlibrary loans after 5 days. Now we saw the government's full-on assault against the long-form censuses and their certain opposition to knowledge and data, but to go after students and librarians with such dumbed-down, regressive approaches is something the New Democratic Party will not support in any way. Now let's look at the issue of the digital lock provision. The digital locks completely makes a mockery of any claim of giving fair rights. The government says that you'll get fair dealing rights for educational, reproduction for private purposes, you can make backup copies, you'll have copying rights for the print disabled, you'll have the so-called YouTube mashup provision. But if there's a digital lock in place, all those rights are erased. Under Section 41 of the Act, it lays out very clear protection for the technological protection measures which supersede the rights that citizens would otherwise be able to enjoy. Thus, C-32 offers citizens rights that they won't actually be able to access. And what this government is doing is actually creating a two-tiered set of rights between digital and non-digital products. Instead of legal certainty, Canadian citizens will face arbitrary limitations on what should be their legal right of access. Now, it's simply not credible to say that this is somehow WIPO compliant, because if you look at the WIPO treaties, digital locks are not guaranteed copyright rights. They're simply enforcement measures. At most, technological protection measures may be thought of adjunct to exclusive rights, but they can't trump the rights that actually exist by law. And in fact, if you look at how other countries have implemented WIPO, there's no reason this government and this Parliament cannot set up a made-in-Canada provision that represents a balance on the digital locks provision. In Section 10 of the WIPO Copyright Treaty, it says that limitations such as the TPMs may be supported as long as they, quote, do not conflict with the normal exploitation of this work. That's exactly what this bill will do. They will override the normal exploitations of this work. Now, the other problem with this jailhouse approach to digital locks and digital issues is the question of whether we'll actually even be able to pass a constitutional challenge. Dr. Jeremy De Beer has raised this issue when he was looking at the previous bill C-61 because he said the digital rights provisions were, quote, a poorly veiled attempt by the government to strengthen the contractual rights available to copyright owners in the guise of copyright reform and the implementation of Canada's international obligations. Further itinerations of Bill C-61 that do not take the fair dealing provisions of the Copyright Act into account could fail constitutional scrutiny. In fact, there's questions of whether this bill with the digital locks provision will actually be able to succeed in a charter challenge. I think fundamentally is that we can make the digital locks provisions work in order to protect copyright data, but if the government thinks that those locks can simply override the existing rights that are guaranteed in the rest of the bill, they're going to have problems, and they're going to certainly have problems in the New Democratic Party. So at this point, in going forward, the New Democratic Party are willing to work with all members of the House, all four parties, because we believe that we must update Canada's copyright laws. We need to find a way to do it. We think it can be done. What we are looking for is a sense from the government that they're willing to work with us. If they're willing to address some of the fundamental problems, we can deal with this in committee. However, if they take the approach that any suggestions or implementations that are slightly different than the government's are somehow a threat and that they're not going to work with us, though then we will not be supporting Bill C-32 at third reading. But I want to say for the New Democratic Party that we are willing to take this to committee, we're willing to work on these issues, and we believe that we can make a very good, made-in-Canada copyright piece of legislation that will not only stand the test of this year and next year, but that will be looked at in other jurisdictions around the world as a way of finding that balance that has been so far elusive in the digital copyright wars of the last 15 years. Thank you, Madam Speaker.